Most of my writing is set in kind of the modern day, so a large part of the inspiration for those stories is meeting people, talking to people, watching kind of drama on TV and, film. It's about using the real world as my starting point and jumping off from that. And I'm inspired a great deal by other people's work, so books, plays, like I said, TV shows. I don't think, if you're creative, I don't think there's anything that you can watch that's been made by somebody creative that doesn't feed your imagination. It's all food for the imagination. You've got to know what your inspiration is. It doesn't have to be at hand 24/7, but you've got to, so if you were inspired by a particular song to write a story and you're a bit stuck, go back to whatever inspired you in the first place. Add inspiration. So I think you need to make sure that you're feeding your imagination each day. I think you need to make sure that you're practicing your writing, even if it's not very good and you don't want to use that bit. Writing 1,000 words a day, even 1,000 words a day, as opposed to not writing 1,000 words a day, the difference in whether you're going to become a writer is huge. People who write words every day, even if they're garbage, will become better writers than people who don't. You've got to practice it. It's not something you can sit and leave. You have to practice it. I was doing fan fiction long before it was ever called fan fiction. I mean, the phrase makes me laugh. It's essentially started with kids copying their favourite writers, and I did that with Roald Dahl. I did my own version of James and the Giant Peach called Bali and the Giant Peach, and I rewrote chapters or the ends of chapters to Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide, wrote my own versions of it. All of this stuff was me practicing my writing, but also learning what my own voice would be. And it developed from that. It developed from me sitting and actually practicing my writing. But I was always being inspired by other people and messing about with their work, I don't know if that sounds right. Essentially, don't be afraid to take other people's writing and use that to help you to become a better writer. So one of my top tips for writing your own fantasy stories is pretty much an obvious one, but go and grab 5 fantasy novels, 5 stories that you love, maybe you don't even know. Read them and look at particularly the opening. Look at the opening page and look at what different authors do in order to bring readers into a story and to keep them reading. And the really good ones, one of the things you'll notice as soon as you start reading is in your heads you'll be asking lots and lots of questions about what's happening next, who things are happening to, why they're happening. The best writers, the best openings are the ones that tap into your curiosity as a human being, and all humans are curious. So have a look at how published writers do it, look at the language they use, look at the way they structure sentences. Is one sentence shorter than another? Is there a reason for that? Does the pace change? When they describe things, what are they describing and how are they describing those things? And one of the things you'll find is they don't describe random objects. When you describe something in detail, it generally tends to be for a reason. So you can learn a great deal just from reading other people's work, and particularly at the beginning. But don't discount the middle of the story, the end of the story. Don't discount looking at the end of each chapter to see whether the writers you're reading entice the reader, basically make you want to carry on reading to the next chapter by leaving an open-ended question there for which you want an answer. This is how the really great writers put their stories together, and you can learn from them. One of the things I was trying to show, I was using the concept of a story mountain, which is a very basic thing, and people think it's too simple. But what it does is it helps you to visualize Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, or the beginning, the middle, and the end. So I explained that the beginning of a story is an introduction. And when we talk about introductions, we introduce the things that matter. So characters first and foremost, and setting. So you kind of know that your starting point is introducing whoever your protagonist or protagonists are. At that point, I talked to the young people about starting the story at a point of drama. So you don't start with the day of the week or the hour if it's not pertinent to the story. You start with something happening, something out of the ordinary, something extraordinary. So from that point, you move on towards, so if you imagine climbing the mountain, you're moving along towards this part here, which is the turning point, the inciting incident, or the point of no return for your character, the point at which there's no longer the option to leave the story, they must remain with the story. And I put rising drama because the tension and the drama, the intensity of the drama kind of rises to that point. And then you have basically your major dilemma, which will lead directly into whatever the final conflict or drama or situation is. And once that's resolved, there's always kind of a period, I guess, of reflection, of trying to understand how you've changed, how the world around you has changed. Characters must go on an emotional journey for themselves, as well as much as a physical journey, because for the character to remain one-dimensional all the way through, it bores the reader. It doesn't reward the reader. So your character must learn something about themselves and something about the world around them, as well as dealing with the drama that they face. And I think if you structure stories so you have your plot, your drama plot, but also your character's journey, emotional journey, I think that you write much stronger stories. If this point here is a point of action or drama, that the next part of that must be a reflection. One of the ways, if I can show you, one of the ways I show young people, and this is very basic, so this isn't, essentially if we talk about a building block or building blocks for a story, if block 1 is action, then the corresponding block 2 must always be a reaction. And this reaction can be physical. So somebody moves on, something else happens. Okay. That's the least interesting. Yeah. What's more interesting for the reaction is your character's emotional reaction to what they face. So they're thinking about what they face. Your character's telling the reader how they feel. And the language that you use to describe things physically shouldn't be the same, really, as the language you use to describe things emotionally. Obviously the same words, but the feel of it's very different. And this emotional reaction is where the empathy comes from. And it's the empathy, understanding, being in the shoes of the character you're reading, connects you to the character. So for me, this is really, really important. And the language that you use, it needs to connect to the emotions in the reader, essentially to the common humanity that your character shares with the reader.